This is From Both Sides, a spontaneous, free-flowing conversation featuring a dynamic team of women, providing insights into both political and civic events affecting the lives of women throughout Pennsylvania. And now, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of From Both Sides. I'm Michelle Soletto, your host. Today we'll be discussing gender bias. And simply put, gender bias is the unequal and unfair attitudes and treatment of women. Gender bias permeates all of our society, from our families, our workplace, our schools, our paychecks, and even to legislative representation. Today, joining me to help lead the discussion is my guest co-host, Karen Best. Karen, welcome. Karen is the former chair of the Republican Party of Cumberland County. Mm-hmm. She is a retired college administrator, and she is volunteer extraordinaire in Cumberland County. I've got to tell you, Karen, you have a huge list of civic and community organizations. You should be applauded for all of your work in the community. And I must tell you, when I read your background, I really thought you were a Democrat. But welcome. I'm glad to have you here today.
Well, thank you, Michelle. I'm delighted to be here, and I think this is an interesting topic. It affects more than 50% of our population, and I look forward to our discussion today.
Okay, great, thank you. So let's get started. I'll introduce our guests. Our guests are two attorneys today from the Saul Ewing Law Firm, one of our sponsors. First, we have Indira Sharma. Indira's practice focuses on commercial litigation with emphasis on real estate litigation and contract disputes. She's received numerous honors, including leading woman of her area. She chairs the firm's Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and I trust in that role, with your help, Saul Ewing is not going to experience any of the problems that we discuss here today. But one of her most important accomplishments that she cites is the fact that she continues to build her law practice, and she has 3 young children, ages 6, 5, and 2. I'm not sure how you do that. I think we might want to have a show just on how you can raise your family and have that kind of intense career. Thank you for being here and welcome.
My pleasure.
Also joining us, also from Saul Ewing, is Robin Leone. Robin's practice is both litigation focused as well as energy and utility consulting. And this is actually Robin's second career. She also spent more than a decade as a government consultant. She chairs the Women's Development Committee at Saul Ewing. And so I would like to start out by having each of you explain why these committees are important to Saul Ewing.
Sure. Well, the legal profession lags behind most other white-collar professions in terms of diversity, which we define as including women lawyers as well. And so it's really important as a profession for law firms to be at the forefront of leading these initiatives and educating everyone about the biases that exist to create a fair workplace for everyone.
And with respect to the Women's Development Initiative specifically, I think that what we find is when you build spaces where women can network specifically with other women, where women can just sometimes sit down over a cup of coffee or have lunch together, that really good things happen. And so that's why we also have a carve out of the Women's Committee that focuses on everything from business development to developing our attorneys into even better lawyers than they already are. And it's really about being as inclusive as possible and really bringing those opportunities to our women attorneys, who I think tend to sort of be off on their own separate hamster wheels unless they're given the opportunity to really dig in and work in teams. We're scattered a little bit throughout the firm. And it's a little bit easier, I think, if you provide those opportunities as opposed to, just hoping that it'll happen organically. So.
Well, it sounds like Saul Ewing is doing all the right stuff. So to get started, rather than talk about why there is gender bias, I think we can all agree that societal norms, roles, and have actually encouraged men, have actually taught men in some instances to treat women in certain ways. So I thought maybe we would start out by sharing some stories. I think we've all probably experienced some gender bias in our careers, and we've got several different decades of women here today. So Indira, would you like to start and share something with us about gender bias that you might have experienced in some aspect of your schooling or your career?
Sure. Well, I'm a litigator, and so is Robin. And so as female litigators, we face our own set of biases every day in dealing in a predominantly male environment. Some examples are in a deposition, sometimes I'll show up and just the terminology that's used even on the record, I've been called hun more than once in a deposition, and then even appearing in court for the first time, which is sometimes the first time you'll meet opposing counsel face to face, and the expectation that, you know, the male partner you're working with should have been there. And even I've been asked, where is so-and-so? Because the assumption, I believe, has always been that I was the court reporter, I was the secretary, or someone of that nature. And so we're often mistaken for those other roles.
You know, there are definitely situations that I've been in where I've been challenged in terms of how I'm speaking, you know, accused maybe of raising my voice or yelling, when, you know, honestly I'm just disagreeing with the person who happens to be male. And it's a fascinating circumstance. I mean, I find myself having to say, no, I'm actually not raising my voice. Maybe you think that I am because we're disagreeing right now. And it's usually effective in having them kind of step back and think about what they just said.
Sometimes I don't think men are as comfortable when women disagree with them. I don't know why. I haven't quite ever put my finger on that, but I understand what you're saying. I know that in my field, I was a school administrator, and I was an assistant superintendent and applying to be a superintendent in a neighboring district. The finalists were two men who were superintendents, and I was an assistant superintendent. I was selected to be the new superintendent of the school. And then when I spoke to my current superior about the fact that I didn't think they offered me enough money, that I was going to be negotiating my salary, he said to me, Michelle, really just take the job and take the salary. They are going to think they're already going to find out that you're difficult and you haven't even been there one day. And I said, why am I difficult when I want to negotiate a salary? I think everybody negotiates salaries. But it was really, really, he saw that as me promoting the wrong image to start off a new position. So many of these stories. Karen, how about you?
Well, I am from a different generation, but, and as I was saying earlier, you know, it used to be that if a woman finished college, that was unusual. You were expected to be a nurse, a secretary, or a school teacher. Now, when I first started in higher education, I actually went back to work full-time when my children were ready to go into college themselves. And in higher education, they were mostly men, presidents, deans, registrars. And when I became a registrar, it was very unusual to go to a national conference and not see almost all men. That has changed, that has evolved. But a lot of it, I think, has improved over time, but there are still
Well, I think as
issues
more and
out
more
there.
women go into any profession, I think you're going to see, you know, hopefully some changes.
Hopefully.
Well, so is this battle that we're facing, is this a battle with men?
I really have to say that it's not. There are some men out there that get it and are really advocating for women. And there are actually some women out there that are making it quite difficult for the women that come behind them. It's a very interesting phenomena. You know, Karen was mentioning she's from a different generation, and sometimes that generation of women, they encountered very difficult times and very difficult struggles, and they might have been the only woman in their law school class and the only woman working at their law firm and the only woman partner for a very long time. And I think that when they get to that level and they see my generation of millennials coming up, they don't understand why either those women should have it easier or why they shouldn't be toughing it out like they did. And so sometimes the women can be a barrier to other women, which I find very disheartening.
I agree. I think that we talk a lot about sponsorship these days. We don't really use the term mentorship anymore, or we do, but we mean something different, something lesser when we talk about mentor. A lot of people can be your mentor, but a sponsor is someone who takes you on and really helps you to get to the next level.
Okay.
And you know, I think we still see a lot of examples of men being the sponsors for young women and not older women being the sponsors for young women. And you know, again, I think that there's a little bit of a I'm scrambling to keep my piece of the pie as big as it needs to be, and I can't focus on that other person right now. But I really feel that, if we really just kind of came together, we would find that we would be, increasing in numbers, and that helps everybody. They've done studies where, if for example, in big law, instead of 17% equity partnership numbers for women, you were closer to 30%, you would see real change in terms of impacts on the business and impacts on the bottom line that would be positive for the law firm.
Well, I do think that your idea of the Women's Development Group is kind of the way to go. I know in my profession, we have in Pennsylvania the Women's Caucus, and it is women's school administrators coming together to help other women. And years ago when I was the president, I remember my husband saying to me one day, I don't know what people would say if we had men's only organizations like that. And I said, well, you do have a men's only organization. And he said, what's that? And I said, it's called the Rest of the World. And because at that time, that's the way it felt to me. But I do think those kinds of organizations, and people question why do we have them, but I think those kinds of organizations do help build that kind of mentorship, or however you want to term it, but the ability to help other women grow and kind of, reach their potential and understand some of the things that we've all been through.
And our initiatives are not focused on just women lawyers. The Women's Development Initiative does events with men, and the Diversity and Inclusion Committee over time has grown and has included all attorneys, because we're not going to make progress unless we include everyone in the discussion. It's not helpful to have a bunch of women sitting around talking about the challenges they face when the majority of the leadership, they're white males.
Good point.
We need to have the men on board as well, and so over time we've changed our initiatives to be more successful in that way.
Okay, great. I want to just ask a question about how women are perceived, and I just want to throw this out. This is a report that I read about performance evaluations, and I'll just go through this. The person was evaluating a man and a woman, and he says about the woman, Jessica's really talented, but I wish she'd be less abrasive. She just comes on too strong. And when they ask about the male counterpart, he says, Steve is an easy case, smart and great to work with. He needs to learn to be a little more patient, but who doesn't? So I think what we're finding by some of these analyses that women's performance evaluations are much more critical than those of men for some of the same issues. Anybody want to comment on that?
I think that's probably another category where everybody might have an example of a time where they were sort of surprised by how something was characterized. I think my favorite example, and this is fairly innocuous, I feel comfortable sharing it. One of my other roles at the firm, I'm on the pro bono committee, and I am definitely a cheerleader for pro bono. I'm really involved, sort of behind the scenes championing our efforts. I meet with a lot of pro bono organizations to try to get us connected, try to get our lawyers out there to do this work. And one year on my performance evaluation, and it was meant in the nicest possible way, but it just struck me as very funny. I was noted for being aggressive in my efforts to promote pro bono. And, I'm sure, again, that they didn't mean anything by it, but to me it was an interesting choice of word.
It certainly is. So at this point, we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors. We'll be right back.
From Both Sides is a production of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy and is made possible by the support of the Pennsylvania Center for Women and Politics at Chatham University, a nonpartisan center devoted to fostering women's public leadership through education, empowerment, and action. The first to focus on women's political involvement in Pennsylvania, the center integrates disciplinary knowledge, civic education, and capacity building, while examining the intersection of women and public policy. From Both Sides is also supported as a public service by Saul Ewing LLP, a law firm with a 100-year tradition of serving the needs of business, government, education, healthcare, technology, and manufacturing in our region. And by the University Center for International Studies, the engine for extending the global reach of the University of Pittsburgh and its students.
From Both Sides is also sponsored by Dr. Wendell Funk, one of Central Pennsylvania's most experienced cosmetic plastic surgeons. Dr. Funk is a leader in new and innovative non-invasive procedures like cool sculpting. His long-term experience with all types of cosmetic surgery, as well as facial injectables, keeps new and repeat patients returning to his practice in Lancaster, York, and Camp Hill. From Both Sides is also sponsored by the Ed and Jeannie Arnold Foundation.
Welcome back to From Both Sides. We're talking today about gender bias, and just to start the conversation again, I'd like to go over some of the data in terms of the number of women we have as representatives in Pennsylvania. For the 2015-2016, we have 45 women in Pennsylvania in the General Assembly. That's 18% of our 253 members. However, compare that to the fact that 51% of our 12.8 million people in Pennsylvania are women. If we look at our bigger picture, in Congress, U.S. Senate, we have no woman representing us. In the U.S. House, we have no woman representing us in Pennsylvania. Our governor is not a woman. In our state row offices, we had one woman, and we've had other women in state row offices, but currently no women in state row offices. 9 out of 50 state senators are women. 38 out of 203 women are in the Pennsylvania House. We rank the 40th in the country with women in the General Assembly. So with that data in mind, and wondering how gender bias affects the fact that we have very few women representing us in Pennsylvania, I'll ask Karen to continue that line of conversation.
Well, I think given in today's political climate, particularly with the presidential election, there is gender bias perceived. But I wonder if you agree with this. Robin?
I mean, I think that there definitely is bias. I think there's sort of two things going on here. One, the underrepresentation. It strikes me that women who maybe would be thinking about public service think again when they see what happens to a woman candidate. So, you know, I think that that's a very real consequence as well of what we're seeing in the current election cycle. And what I think is interesting too, there was a study recently that was basically talking about Secretary Clinton's popularity rates during different phases of her professional career. And she's always at the lowest when she is campaigning for an office. And then once she's in that office, her popularity ratings go up.
You know, I heard somebody say, actually this morning on the news, she's a much better person to affect change in government than she is a campaigner. She's not really a natural, I don't think, campaigner that just loves it the way Bill Clinton did, and Governor Rendell and some other people, I think, who are really natural politicians.
I agree, and she has been very forthright in saying, as a public servant, she's much better as the servant than she is as the public. She's not a natural campaigner who can go out and glad hand as her husband did, or many other successful candidates and politicians.
But is it fair that we're analyzing her hair, her outfit, whether she looks thin today or heavy today? I mean, is this really fair? Do we do this with men?
I think when you're in the public eye, you are subject to some of that. But where the gender bias is most apparent in the election is just the standard to which she is held is so much higher. I mean, here we have undisputedly a more qualified candidate. This is the situation that we have in the workplace as well. You have a female candidate who's so very qualified and up against someone who, quite frankly, doesn't have the same resume that she does. But she is being held to the standard of perfection during the debates. I mean, she has outperformed him, but in this last one, the news is reporting that she had a narrow win, or some polls are saying that he might have won. And that is just a clear example of the bias, because the standard she's facing is so much higher. The bar is set much lower for him.
I mean, I've definitely been reading where, you know, is he just going to not make huge errors and then that's a win for him?
Yes.
Whereas, you know, at the end of a debate, you know, I just saw after the first debate, Britt Hume talking about that she was smiling too much this time, when this is a candidate that's been accused of not being friendly and not smiling enough. So, you know, she can't win either way, it seems.
Well, it sort of reminds me, and I will tell a little story. When I was running for township supervisor in Silver Spring Township, I went door to door, and this was this was decades ago. And I got a question from one of the male constituents who I was talking to, and he said, well, And are you going to get up there and drive that snowplow and plow those roads? And I went, well, no, I don't think so. But that was the mindset, that the local township supervisor would actually be out there clearing the roads. And that's the way it was years and years and years ago. So, you know, there are subtle ways that you get put down, and, you know, you just learn to deal with it, to, you know, skirt around it and do other things. But I think it's very difficult for women to consider running for public office. And that's the shame of it. You know, it's, you know, am I going to be criticized for my looks, for not paying more attention to my family, whatever it may be. So
Yes, the scrutiny is definitely much higher.
Yeah, did people ask you questions because you've got 3 little ones at home, how you can maintain a law practice?
All the
and
time.
Get all that done?
All the time. I don't take too much offense to it because I think there's a lot of interest in how to do it, and I think people sometimes mean well. They just want to figure out ways to make it happen. But I will say that men don't get asked the same questions. There are men out there and they have 3 kids as well, and nobody's thinking, well, how are you so accomplished in your career?
I know it. What do you think that women can do really to help this whole situation? Because, I mean, I know one of the things that I was very involved in this women's caucus for many years and try to coach people, mainly women, in their I can tell you one time in one of my, when I was first applying to be a school principal many years ago, I was asked by a woman board member if I had any children. And I said no, that I didn't. It was an illegal question. I said, no, I don't. And she said, do you plan on having any? Yeah, and I had the same look on my face that you just had. And I just was so shocked. And I said, well, not right now, because I guess I didn't want them to not want to hire me because they thought maybe I would get pregnant. But I mean, it is shocking. It is just shocking, some of the things. And so what can we as women do to help other women? Because I do fear that, maybe not you because you get it, but I do fear that younger women don't know some of the trials and tribulations that we've all been through and may not appreciate it as much as I certainly do, or maybe you do, Karen.
Well, speaking of politics, how we can encourage more women to run for public office, because if more women are seen, then it is not such an unusual thing. It's not odd. The Republicans have the Ann Anstein program, where it's a year-long program, and, you know, teaching young women about raising money, about marketing themselves, about, you know, all of the aspects of campaigning. The Democrats have a similar program
Center for Women in Politics
through Chatham College in Pittsburgh. You know, those help, but that's 20 to 25 women per year. That's not a whole lot. My daughter has said, I don't want to run for public office. You know, why would I want to subject myself to the criticism and the scrutiny, because you can't please everybody.
Right.
So.
I think women have to support each other. What I find is the dynamic among women is sometimes very dangerous. It's very competitive. Even, you know, you're looking at a working mom or stay-at-home mom or a mom who does both, and there's always a comparison about who's doing better or who is managing it better, and we just need to stop doing that. We need to start supporting each other, very much like the guys do. We hear a lot about this old boys network. I've said we need to create a women's network like that, one where we're sharing with each other and helping each other in our business development and supporting each other in our careers.
And where it happens just as a matter of course. I don't see enough of that, at least in the legal profession. You know, I see that it still needs to be something that is on your to-do list. You know, go to lunch with X and make sure X is a woman. And, you know, it's fascinating to me that, you know, we don't take the time to do that when we see all of these examples around us of how that happens. To me, and maybe it you know, it's just my perception because I'm not a man, but it seems easier for men to do those sorts of things, to just kind of walk out the door, grab a couple of colleagues and go, or, you know, be out on the golf course, with clients or with just colleagues, talking sports. It's interesting to me because I actually play sports. I'm a women's ice hockey player, which is a very niche area, believe me. And I can talk about baseball, I can talk about football, but I always sort of get a little bit of reticence when I try to do that with men because they're kind of taken aback. Well, what do you know?
I hate those women who know all about sports because I know nothing about them, and I always think, wow, the men relate to them so well. But you're saying no, they don't always. They're surprised.
I think there's a little lag before they kind of warm to the idea.
Okay.
But I definitely have been in situations where you don't want to be the smartest person in the room when you're talking about sports with men.
I kind of tend to think, though, that there's a male gene that's connected. This is probably gender bias, that there's a male gene about sports that I certainly don't have and will never have. I liked sports when I was in schools because I felt like it was a good result for students to learn these kind of team building things, and
Absolutely.
good coaches were good teachers. But honestly, I don't have that gene, and I don't know that I'll ever have it. I don't know, that's probably my own gender bias. But, well, any other advice for young women that you work with, or our viewers that are wondering what they might want to do in these situations, or what if they're faced with gender bias? What should they do?
That's what I was going to say. I was thinking if we don't have people calling it out, one of the ways to attack bias, and we've done a lot of bias training at Saul Ewing through our diversity retreats, is you have to recognize it, and a lot of it's unconscious, so people are not recognizing that this is going on, and people are not meaning to offend and to be biased, but it's just a human nature tendency. So we have to call it out. It makes people pause and think, why am I doing this? And is it fair?
Yeah, I think one of the problems is sometimes when it happens, you're in a relationship where the woman is reporting to someone at a higher level, and it does make it very uncomfortable. And I think it's a worry. And how do you deal with it when it's a superior that is the person that is putting you in that situation?
If you know that you're controlled and you've done it in the most professional way possible, I mean, your integrity is your integrity. Nobody can take that away from you. So I always say, do the right thing, always.
I really think that what we do, and more organizations should be doing it, is not just calling it out, but helping people to know what it is, because I think it is so valuable. Some of the things that we've done over the past few years at our firm, it has been eye-opening for people.
Well, I do want to thank Saul Ewing not only for being our sponsor, but for the kind of programs that they're developing at their firms, because I think they're way ahead of the game. And I think more people should take note of the kinds of things you're doing at Saul Ewing and do them in their own businesses as well. So in closing, I'd like to say that gender bias provides constraints to progress for any society because it limits the opportunities for half of its population. To enable any community or workplace to flourish, both sexes must share equally in both power and influence in their organizations. So thank you for joining us for another edition of From Both Sides. And please remember, as women in Pennsylvania, that there's much more that unites us than divides us. Thank you.